Next session is called Transforming Training Programs and Courses to Maximize Learning. This is a very interesting and challenging topic, especially if you need to deliver the education online. Our speaker is Max Troyer. He has more than 20 years of experience in the technology, language, and consulting industries. He has worked in a wide variety of functions, both freelance and in-house, including project management, localization engineering, multilingual layout or desktop publishing, training, technical support, and process or workflow consulting. In addition to being an associate professor and a program chair of the Translation and Localization Management master's degree program at Middlebury Institute of Internal Studies at Monterey, he is a freelance translation and localization consultant. Max, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And I couldn't help but think about Rafael and how he would be required to train the linguists who are doing the mapping of words together. So I would love to talk to him and see like how they go about onboarding new people to do that. A very interesting task, and I really appreciated his presentation. So what I would like to discuss today is kind of what we went through at the Middlebury Institute with the pandemic. I think that as bad as the pandemic has been, there have been a number of silver linings. And in education, I think that we've seen our digital transformation take place, whether we wanted to or not. Many professors who never thought they would teach online are now teaching online. And I think that that digital transformation was accelerated at many companies as well. And so I would like to discuss how the transformation that we have made in our classrooms may directly apply to what companies are doing when it comes to onboarding new employees and kind of continuing education of existing employees. So I think I want to start with the poll. So if we could get that poll up on the screen, and I could just kind of get a feel for what kind of people we have in the audience. If your company does some kind of training, what kind of training is it? Is it kind of ad hoc? You don't really have anything formal? Do you have your new employees meet with HR? Do you do some big, or did you do some big in-person course? Is it all video based or some kind of blended learning? And I realize I haven't really defined blended learning yet, but we'll leave that up for a few seconds. I am going to go ahead and go to my next slide and talk about my experience with in-person training. My first job out of college was as a software engineer at Arthur Andersen in Chicago. And Arthur Andersen owned a training facility in St. Charles, Illinois, called the Center for Excellence. And all new hires in the fall from all over the world, it was a global country with offices in many countries, all worldwide hires were brought to St. Charles, Illinois for an intense week of team building and training. It costs over $10,000 per employee to bring them to St. Charles, not to mention the millions of dollars that it cost to maintain this college campus. We were put into cohorts with people from all over the world. We were given case studies that we had to work on. We had to give presentations to the executive team and to partners from the firm who would come and check in and see how we were doing. But that lower left picture on the screen right now is the social component, the bar essentially. And really much of what I remember of that really expensive training was all the fun that I had after the training was over and we were hanging out in the bar. And so that's one extreme, bringing everyone to a central location and then going about the training. Now the other extreme that we have is completely video, 100% video training. And a few years back, I heard from a graduate who was hired at a big translation agency, and basically before the first start date, he was asked to watch about a week's worth of video. And he emailed me because he said, is this normal that I haven't even started yet, and I'm being asked to watch all of these videos? He said the videos were pretty good. It wasn't that, but he wasn't getting paid to do the videos. And it was kind of an abrupt way to start at the company. It wasn't, I guess maybe the human touch was missing. So maybe we can stop the results of the poll and see the data. All right, so it looks like it's a good mix. Some about 20%, nothing formal, 20% in person, 30% video based, 30% blended learning. And so I'm going to take a screen capture of this before it goes away. This is really good information. Thank you for completing the poll. And I think that I don't want you to believe that I want to come down too harshly on 100% video-based training. There's a lot to be said for that. Except one thing, going back to Arthur Andersen, a firm started at the beginning of the 20th century. Arthur Andersen started one of the very first CPA, Certified Public Accounting, training programs, and he firmly believed that all training should take place during business hours. And I think that is kind of laughable and commendable for many companies. In fact, when we talk about the talent gap in the industry, it's a topic that comes up all the time, this talent gap between academia and the industry. I think much of that can be blamed on the fact that companies don't do a lot of in-house training anymore. And if we look at some data on training, so pretty recent data, I don't know if the book Boone data comes pre-pandemic or post-pandemic, but we can guess that we could conclude some training takes place during work hours and some training takes place outside of work hours. And I kind of just think that, thinking about the optics of asking employees to work outside or during office hours or during working hours. And then when we're onboarding employees, about 1/4 of that has been replaced by some kind of e-learning, and then not getting into the details of what kind of e-learning, but 25% of onboarding has been replaced by e-learning. And again, with a statistic like that, you kind of wonder, is the type of training we're doing super niche? Like if we're hiring someone for a very specific position that no one else does, then it doesn't make sense to make a training course about it. But if you're hiring a lot of similar types of employees, then it makes sense to do some kind of training. So maybe that's what we get into with how much of training has been replaced by e-learning. And then how much are companies paying for training? And according to the training industry report a couple of years ago, it seems to be that across very different types of companies, about $1,000 per employee is being spent on training. And so, how far does that get you? I suppose it depends on how many people are taking the training course. Getting into some definitions about different types of online or learning in general, or training in general. You have a difference between hybrid and blended learning. And generally, a hybrid is where you acknowledge that some people are on site and some people are remote. And rather than do two different sets of training for in-person or remote people, you have everyone do one training session. And that actually makes a lot of sense from an equity point of view. You don't want your remote employees to feel like they're second tier and they're remote, and so they don't get to be in person. They don't get the happy hour after the training, for example. And then with hybrid learning, the instructors themselves may be either in person or remote. There could be a main instructor who is there in person, and then other people are remote. And then when we switch to blended learning, we are thinking really more about online learning opportunities combined with some kind of in-person instruction. Or really, if we take it to the next level, we don't necessarily need the people to all be on the same page as far as what they're doing. So we get into synchronous versus asynchronous. And so with synchronous, we're talking about specific meeting times, whereas asynchronous is training that can be taken at any time, either during work hours, after work hours, on the weekend, although synchronous training could also be after work or on the weekends. But the point is that asynchronous, I can take that training whenever I want. I don't have to wait for a class to start. Synchronous training is generally better for people who are not super familiar with how technology works, because you're there to hold their hand. Whereas with asynchronous learning, you've got people that have to log on to a website and access the training material, and it could be a little bit more complicated. Synchronous training excels at when things are really complicated, when people will have a lot of questions, when a lot of things could go wrong. It makes sense to do those types of trainings in synchronous sessions. Whereas if you have really straightforward material that doesn't require a lot of explanation, or I guess not that much can go wrong, then that really works well for asynchronous content. When everyone taking the training kind of has a similar experience, then synchronous is fine, because everyone will kind of be progressing through the material at the same rate. But if you have people that come from widely different backgrounds, with asynchronous learning, you can have optional training. Like if you have no idea what NLP is, then you should watch this 101 on NLP to learn about that before you go into the rest of the training. So you can kind of have variable training depending on what people know. Synchronous training is probably, or is generally cheaper to develop compared to asynchronous training, because, well, we'll get into the why asynchronous training is more expensive, but it takes a lot more thought. You can kind of improvise a lot more with synchronous training when you're in person with people. You can also ad lib when you're in synchronous training. You can kind of riff and go off people's interests and open up tangents, and that's not something you can always do with asynchronous. Synchronous training is generally pretty expensive, because you're kind of stopping the presses and asking all of your employees to come at a certain time. And so if you've got a production team and you want to train them in a new CAT tool, and you say, we're gonna do this training right now, then nothing is happening in production for an hour or two while you do that training. Whereas asynchronous, you can reuse that and have people take that at their own time and not kind of close things down. In the past, when I would think about creating new training, I would go down this rabbit hole of learning styles. And, you know, you've heard that people want to learn visually, or they want to hear it, or they want to read it, or they need social interaction, all these different learning styles. But I am happy to say that the American Psychological Association, the APA, there's an article, Belief in Learning Styles Myth May Be Detrimental to Learning. And the British Psychological Association did a meta-analysis of many studies that said that people who are holding on to this idea of learning styles are doing a disservice to people who are trying to learn. And so if you are in charge of training or have influence on training, you can let learning styles go a little bit. Now, I'm not saying that visual learning and auditory learning are bad things, but what we can say is that especially for the next generation of employees, the recent hires, the younger people, I think the key is mixing it up. And this is what we're doing with our classes at the Middlebury Institute. We're trying to basically constantly shift the type of content that our students are consuming. So sure, they still read written articles. Sometimes that's the best way to learn something, but rather than transcribe an interview, we'll record the video interview and they'll watch the interview. We also have many demonstration videos. Our program is very tech focused, and so we're constantly demonstrating how to use software applications and websites. And so we will use screen capture and narration to walk people through various things that they need to do. And when we went fully online with the pandemic, one of the things that students said about my style of teaching is that students can pause me. In the classroom, students would have to raise their hand and say, I'm stuck. I want to solve this problem before we can move on. But now that I have demonstration videos for all of my lessons, students can simply pause me, resolve a problem, and then resume me, and I'll keep going. And that's something that wasn't possible before. I also use podcasts. Sometimes when the visual image isn't important, I will take what I want to say and record a podcast. I do this when I get really emotional about something and I feel like text is not going to capture how passionate I am about something. I'll make a podcast and then students can listen to that. Of course, it's also transcribed in case people can't stand my speaking style. They can avoid the podcast and just read the transcription. And then we get into kind of visual infographics, like demonstrating a concept through a graphic. And this is great for things like workflows and other concepts where there are many moving parts and you want to show relationships between them. I think we've all seen infographics, but are you using them in your training? That's a question. And then we get into interactives, which are really infographics that move. And it's so you've got an infographic where you can kind of click on stuff and stuff happens. I'll give some examples here in a few slides. And then we get into live training, which is simply traditional in-person training. And what we have found is that when you have people in person, either in a classroom, in an office room, or online, you really have to use their time wisely. When you've got people in person, you don't want to waste their time. You really want to use that time for when you want to focus on something or have some kind of discussion. I don't know how many companies have a knowledge base. I've worked with a couple companies in the past on creating some kind of knowledge base, but whenever you do any kind of training, it's good to give students a takeaway, and creating a knowledge base where you either run the training from direct links into a knowledge base or have a searchable knowledge base where people can access training. That's kind of a good sanity check to make sure that you are capturing the training in a way that students can reuse it, or all the employees can use after the training. So this is an example of a WordPress knowledge base plugin or theme that you can build fairly easily. And then when you're building training material, I don't want you to think that you have to produce all the training material yourself. You've got existing sources. You've got LinkedIn Learning, Skillshare, and YouTube. And, you know, they're kind of in order of cost. LinkedIn Learning is about $300 per year per user. Skillshare is about $99 per user. And YouTube is free. And you go from highly curated educators to maybe slightly less professional educators to complete amateurs sometimes creating content. And so you've got a lot of different options for different kinds of training, but don't reinvent the wheel. Try to find existing training when it's already out there and reuse it. If you have to create some training yourself, it's pretty easy to use modern tools like Screencast-O-Matic to either record yourself or record the screen of what you want to demo. I actually use a tool called Snagit Pro, but it does the same thing as Screencast-O-Matic. It captures my screen, it records my narration for what I want to do, and then students can see exactly what I did. For video editing, the tools are becoming amazing. If you've got a Mac, you obviously have iMovie, but there's a relatively new product called Adobe Rush, which is a very easy to use video editor. I think that almost anyone could learn Rush in just a few hours and be able to take video content and audio content and still motion captures or screen captures, combine them into some really compelling training. This is a screen capture of Snagit. You can actually add really fancy graphic elements, the call outs and things. So Snagit's a tool that I recommend. Embedding audio on a website is very easy. This is an example of how you can embed an audio block in a WordPress website. So you could have a page of some content, then have a podcast or some kind of audio that you want people to listen to. Just think about kind of multimodal training. We get into infographics. This is a screen capture from Canva, a really easy to tool that many of you probably already use to create really fancy designs. And Canva can be used to make infographics in a really easy way. And it's just a way to present the same information in just a different format that's more easily digested by people's eyes, right? When it comes to kind of the interactives, we use H5P in our program, and H5P lets you create things that move. You've got accordions. You can have animated charts that are interactive, where you have to drag and drop images, fill in the blanks, flashcards. I use a lot of flashcards to reinforce concepts and definitions. Image hotspots is one I use a lot. If I've got a new interface that I want to show someone, I'll take a screen capture of the interface and use hotspots where students can click and learn about how an interface works. Timeline is a pretty useful function that H5P has. Actually, memory game as well is a fun one where you can have people try to match things, and then you have true, false, branching. Anyway, all sorts of other things. So I want to leave time for questions, and so I'm gonna end with this slide: blended learning best practices. And so thinking about like how you use asynchronous versus synchronous content to reinforce concepts, asking existing employees how they would have preferred to learn, and asking them if they have any ideas. If you have an existing training program and it's entirely in person or it's entirely video based, I'm really dramatic here, consider starting from scratch, but rethink how you're doing it. And maybe you can start with baby steps and take some of the video training and turn it into an infographic, and another turn it into a video, or sorry, it's already video based, turn it into an article. So just, mixing it up a little bit. If you're hiring more than one person at a time, I think building that cohort is super important. You can have peer learning from each other. You can ask existing employees to help create the training material, or ask them to take the new training as a pilot to kind of gauge how it works. And then manage expectations with students with new employees, any employees, new employees, existing employees. Why are you using blended learning? Why are you mixing it up? Why are you asking them to take the training on their own time? And so I would love to find out how you're doing training at your company, or if you have any insights to how we should all be doing training. You can see my contact information on the screen right now, and I'm happy to take questions. Start the discussion.
Thank you, Max. Yeah, we have seen a real tool chest and a whole lot of ideas that can be used in an educator's repertoire, if you will. This was one of the presentations that I would definitely save for future reference, and it made me rather enthusiastic as a former or still sort of active intermittent educator. I have a question for you though. Did you do, or do you plan to do any studies of how efficient specific training approaches, methods, mixes are? Did you see any pitfalls that could be detrimental to the efficiency of the training? So do you have any results, any survey results, or any studies about what works best, how training materials, knowledge gets transferred best?
Yeah, well, it's a little bit anecdotal, but the way that we do our training is project-based learning and then project-based assessment. And so luckily, as we have gone to blended learning with mixed media, we have used very similar assessment. And so our learning is project-based and very blended, and then but our assessments are pretty much the same. And so if anything, I have seen that our students have gone more in depth into the things that they're interested, the questions they're having. They're getting more nuance out of the learning. And I think it's frankly because they can, if they get frustrated, they can simply pause the training and come back to it later when they've calmed down. And when we were in the classroom, it was a lot of pressure and students would just kind of opt out and close down. So I think that anecdotally, our training has improved because of blended learning.
Thank you very much. This is really useful. Here's another one. Catherine says it was a great presentation, Max, and I agree with her. Have you found any favorite tools to onboard new hires or students at a social level? What's a good virtual alternative to in-person happy hour in your experience? That's a good one. We were dealing with that a lot.
Yes, I think that I wish if you yesterday, some of our students presented some of the stuff they're doing, the TLM mentorship program, this Camp Loc Ready, some of these organizations that are helping students. And one of my students recommended a kind of a happy hour version of Zoom, and the name of it escapes me. If anyone knows that, I would love to see that in the chat. But yeah, cohort building online is a little bit tough. You can only send people into breakout sessions in Zoom so many times before they start dreading the breakout session. So I don't have any magic solutions that aren't just the typical breakout room. But I think one of the things I'll say is, if you put people into breakout rooms to build smaller cohorts, you have to send them into that breakout room with some questions or things that they can discuss. You can't just send them in and expect them to figure it out and just talk about anything. Give them something to talk about. Give them something to chew on, basically.
Thank you. This sounds, yeah, that sounds encouraging. Here's another one. Instructional design is a specialty. Are you in favor of a do-it-yourself model, or is training development something you should hire out?
Ooh, I think that having an instructional designer on retainer is not a bad idea. If you have a relatively sizable training budget, or you have a lot of employees to train, I think having an instructional designer come on board and look at the training material and provide feedback would be an excellent investment. And one of the things that I meant to share was something that we use. We've actually adapted it. It's called Camp Design Online, and it is open source. I am going to copy the link into the chat, and there, I've dropped that into the chat. This is free tools available for building learning communities and thinking about digital inclusion, digital inquiry, and digital imagination. Anyway, this is a free course that instructional designers use to build their courses. And so if you have no budget for instructional designers, this is a free way of kind of getting some of those skills.
Thank you very much, Max, and thank you very much for the presentation. Unfortunately, our time is up. So, if any remaining questions, I trust my colleagues to relate to you, and maybe that there's going to be another way to answer them. Again, thank you everyone for your time.